Hello. This week in our Bible study we are going to look at Daniel chapter 4. This chapter is about King Nebuchadnezzar. Some of it is in his own words. Do you remember being taught to write essays at school? Tell them what you are going to say, then say it, then in conclusion tell them what you have said. Well, this chapter is a bit like that. Nebuchadnezzar's message in verses 2 and 3 tells you what he wants to say. I want you all to know about the miraculous signs and wonders the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how powerful his wonders. His kingdom will last forever, his rule through all generations. This is repeated in verse 17. So that everyone may know that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world. He gives them to anyone he chooses. And again in verse 25, until you learn that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world and gives them to anyone he chooses. And again the same in verse 32. They are repeated to emphasize this is important. We might write it in bold nowadays. But how did this powerful king, this self-made man who had conquered other nations and ruled the greatest empire of his time, how did he learn this lesson? He had a dream that shattered his comfort and peace of mind. But what did it mean? This time, Nebuchadnezzar described his dream to the wise men, but once again it was Daniel who was able to interpret it. Were the other wise men perhaps a wee bit afraid of interpreting the dream? So we have Nebuchadnezzar's description of his dream, and it is clearly bad news for someone. Daniel was horrified by the dream and afraid for the king. Although this king, Nebuchadnezzar, had conquered the Jewish nation and destroyed Daniel's home, Daniel is not pleased to bring him bad news and is not gloating over his downfall. He doesn't want to bring such a harsh interpretation, and he is probably nervous about bringing it. There are some things that the Bible teaches that are hard for people to hear. We are reluctant to speak out those things that are hard to accept, that challenge people's beliefs and lifestyles. Like Daniel, we care about people. We don't want to hurt them. We try to be loving and kind. But Daniel was also truthful and faithfully passed on God's message. We owe it to people to do the same in the most respectful and kind way we can. King Nebuchadnezzar needed to hear what Daniel had to say. Firstly, because when this happened, he would have hope that his troubles were not permanent and there was a purpose in them. And also because he had a chance of following Daniel's advice and being humble and turning away from his arrogance and from his sins and cruelty, and so maybe avoiding the need for such a hard lesson. Nebuchadnezzar didn't learn his lesson from the dream, just like he hadn't learnt the lessons in chapter 2 and chapter 3. He is congratulating himself on his power and his great achievements when he hears a voice telling him that he will lose his sanity, have to be isolated, would behave like an animal, even eating grass, and would not care for himself. Nebuchadnezzar suffered severe mental illness. Sometimes we learn our lessons through the hardest times in our lives. This does not mean that mental health problems are a sign of being unspiritual, of being proud or sinful or having no faith. Mental illness is an illness, just like physical illness is an illness. Nebuchadnezzar had a lesson to learn. He learned it when he looked up. He looked up to heaven. His sanity returned, and he worshipped God. And it is good for our mental and emotional well-being when we look up, when we accept the reality that God is far greater than all of us, and worship him. When my life stops revolving around me and centers on God. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs." Those who realize their need for God. Those who do not try to build themselves up, but who receive the grace and love that God gives them. Those who know they don't deserve God's favor, but receive it gratefully. Those who don't depend on their own goodness, but on the perfect Lord Jesus, who gave his life to give us life. Those who are small in their own eyes, but who look up. Thank you for listening. Bye.